Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our little chat room with George. Welcome, mate. Thanks, Jolie.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. George, tell our viewers who you are, what you do, where you're based, all that sort of jazz.
So I'm the performance nutritionist at Saracens Rugby. I've been working with the setup there since 2012. I also work with another elite football team, West Bromwich Albion, on a consultancy basis. I've also done some stints in French rugby with Bordeaux-Bègles, and as well as some individuals doing long distance adventure sort of rows across the Atlantic, maybe long walks in the polar regions as well. So had a bit of a mix of different experiences over the years.
A good CV then, mate. A good CV.
It's all right. You always get better.
He knows a thing or two about food. Let's say that.
About nutrition. Okay, let's go for it. So, Jolie, what do you want to talk about?
Well, we were just having a quick chat before we went live, so I just quite like to get the balance right. So with the Saracens rugby team, you was talking about the balance between the pyramid, which is the performance, health, and body composition, which within our field as well, it's quite relatable to not only performance athletes, but for your Joe public as well. And it's basically how you do that is how you get the performance without sacrificing the health and the body composition.
Yeah, it's like I said. So I was trying to explain it. Like if I visualize it, it's kind of like a triangle, and you've got health up here, you've got performance over here, and you've got body composition, and they're all kind of three really important factors to any person or anyone who's training or doing anything. And they all kind of work a little bit against each other, but are all necessary. So the example would be performance is really important to fuel that with lots of calories, lots of energy. But if you're someone who's trying to drop some weight, you might require a consistent calorie deficit to look at body fat coming off. And so that would impact performance. So we have to find a way of programming so we can get this energy deficit without impacting performance. So we might look at some sort of energy cycling. So we have high days, low days. So across the week, we're ending up in a calorie deficit. But at these important moments around important sessions or matches, we're making sure that energy is the priority. We're also ensuring that, the demands of the sport are being met, so we're not impacting health. So if energy intake's too low, we start impacting health through maybe a restriction in calories or restriction in actual food. So the daily requirements of minerals, nutrients are not being met, and we're running a risk of impacting immunity there. Obviously, in the current climate, we definitely don't want to be impacting anyone's immunity. So it's always a constant balance in that. And
is that something you do? Do you take body composition, say, like monthly, once a week, or?
Yeah, we do. So when everyone reported back in, we do it, and we do it every 4 weeks. And it's kind of a transient track. And then from that, we can decide if someone needs to make any changes.
Hey, hang on, you're putting on a few pounds here. We need to address this.
Well, the whole point is, we don't have a sort of like, it's not designed as a catch out, it's just as a track, and it's to help the guys understand where they are, and then the trainers also understand where they are as well. And the whole thing is, we're doing the best, and we're doing the best for the athlete. So we're creating the right player that's right for them, not necessarily the player we have in our mind or what we think is right for them. It's about the athlete being able to perform at the best of what they can do, and that's not always the same for each person.
How are you measuring that?
So we use the Isaac's 8-site skinfold. So we're using these things called Harpenden skinfold calipers, and we use the Isaac method. So that's 8 sites across the body, and they add up to a total millimeter. We can also plug those into an equation. We use the Riley one, and it can give a body fat percentage, but we don't really like to use that. We prefer to use absolute mils because we find that those combined with some girth measurements give us a really good picture of for the athlete, and we can be quite consistent with those. Whereas if you just say, your X percentage, mils could actually change a fair amount within that percentage, and we don't see it change. Whereas when you're focusing a little bit more on the mils, it gives you a little bit more to look at.
How did you do that through COVID?
We didn't. So we obviously weren't able to do it, and now when we do it, it's undertaken under strict sort of PPEs worn. So I'm in a face covering, gloves, full. Look like something out of when that scene in ET when they're chasing him down the road. I look a bit like that. So yeah, it's a really the lads really enjoy coming in to see me.
like we were just chatting before we went live, but so Saracens are back. They're back training. You know.
Yeah. All the Premiership clubs are back in now, so they're preparing for the season, which they're hoping to get going in later in the month. So yeah, you know, still having to observe a lot of the social distancing measures that are in place, and there's lots of guidelines that we have to follow to ensure that we're keeping our facilities safe and everyone who's coming into work is staying safe as well.
Now, what's their sort of training protocol like? Is it contact? Is it sort of you know, they sort of have on days, off days?
That varies, you know. We have high days and low days. Generally, they do have gym sessions each day, and in the afternoon they'll have some sort of pitch work.
So, man. So, how do you deal with their level of nutrition? Like, what is it that, you know, they coming in on a day, and generally you know what we were discussing before is that you supply them with all their food, you know, for the day. Obviously, you were just saying that you can't do that. So
So for example, pre-COVID, we would give the guys would arrive and we'd be running breakfast from 7:30 in the morning, and we're talking full. We've got full cold bar with cereals and then hot options. So all your traditional hot options. Obviously not like a full breakfast, but you know, we've got plenty of calories on there, with plenty of eggs, plenty of protein options, some hot vegetable options as well, egg options, and we're not able to do that at the moment. At the moment, we're only able to supply one meal, and it needs to be a takeaway sort of meal, so the guys can take it away, and because they're trying to mitigate not spending too much time together outside that's necessary for training. So yeah, there's a massive drop in the amount of calories you give them. So we're having to educate and sort of encourage guys to be coming in more prepared than potentially they would be. So it's a good learning for a lot of players, and good challenge for us as well, just to keep putting the good messages out there and encouragement and fixing solutions with players who maybe were able to rely on environments which at the moment we're just having to sort of step back a little bit from what we're doing.
Going back to like pre-COVID, I mean, hopefully this won't last forever, but how much were the players spoon-fed in terms of what they can and can't eat?
It's never really that. I don't think can and can't really works with any sort of individual. It's more like, you know, trying to set the environment so they naturally make right decisions. So, you know, they might go into a group where you're a mass gainer, or you're trying to be focusing on your body composition, or you're a maintainer, and within that there might be certain supplements or shakes that we use and set up for them. But it wouldn't really be if we want to encourage, and it'd be a joint decision in what we're doing, so a player would understand why they're doing something for the benefit of them. So it's not so much the spoon feeding sort of
so it'd almost be like encouragement to say, after your body fat, like increase your protein or reduce your fats or eat more veg, sort of.
Yeah, it's little fixes. It's generally because, you know, these are elite performers. They are sort of they're a lot of them are quite a long way down the road, and they are little tweaks. They don't really need to be shown like all the ropes. But you might get one who goes, actually, I want to know exactly what to eat, when to eat it, and how many quantities. It's because I'm going to use scales and I want to go through this process, and that's brilliant. But then if you turn around to someone who just wants a general idea because they think they've got quite a good idea on it themselves, and you give them that diet, because you've kind of taken a machine gun to crack a walnut, and it's going to lose that person because they think, well, you don't really understand me because you come at it with your idea.
To the individual and the team, I guess. Just like
exactly. Exactly. It's always got to be sort of focused on the individual, and then our most important principle is, you know, it's performance backwards. It's what's relating to them on the field, or what's making that is what's important. It's that performance, and then from there, that should guide us into what we do off it.
How do you measure that? I don't know if you talk about it. How do you measure like athletes' performance? Do they have a tracker? Do they have like? How do you know how many?
Lots of things. It can just be how they perform in training. I know that we've got lots of sports science metrics that they do look at as well. So the coaches get a good, and the players get a good idea of like how they're measuring up in the group, and they'll take those things from there.
So that's good. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what else we were talking about? So we were just talking about the different processes of carbs, proteins, and fats, and we're just saying about, is there an optimal weight that these guys have to be at depending on their position? I know you've played football with worked with football teams, so is it is there a crossover? You know, a certain position has to be a certain weight, optimal weight, or is that just kind of?
I think once again it comes down to the player. Again, you know, obviously in rugby there is a little degree of, if you're too light, it's you're going to struggle in the contact area of the game, and two, you might be at more risk of injury. So there's a degree that they do need to be a certain weight. But again, it does come back down to the player. One player could play phenomenally well with a little bit of extra fat and a few extra kilos on them than another player who would function better lean. It's all about how they manage it and how they can tolerate it. And again, that's where, you know, that performance backwards comes in. You know, it's not, we shouldn't, I don't believe you should go, oh, there's position X, say tight head, prop, and they should all be 120 kilos. Because
if you have a look at
if you look at all the
team in, say, like the 1980s, where the typical rugby team was more round, and now they all look like, you know, CrossFit champion.
Yeah, and they're about half a foot shorter as well.
Yeah. In terms of, say, your role in a team, how much more at the forefront is your role now than it used to be, say, like 20 years ago?
Well, I'd say that the nutritionist didn't really feature much before the 2003 World Cups, where there would have been sort of a presence. And again, I'm still very rare in being pretty much full-time in my role. There's still a lot of consultancy side of it, but it's definitely growing. The research area, the universities like Liverpool John Moores, you know, the amount of research that's coming out that's being conducted in sports nutrition is amazing, and it's giving so many insights and actionable points that can be worked into players' lifestyles. And you know, the percentages between winning and losing are getting smaller and smaller. So if you can find those little percentages, especially when you're thinking worlds of athletics, like you're looking at the 100 meters and a few hundredth of a second, it's the difference between an Olympic gold and not even placing. You know, it's these little things that are growing and growing, and as the evidence base grows, the confidence in the field grows. It becomes a bit less sort of, let's get this macro route in you, and a bit more, let's get this thought about consistent fueling strategy in place.
George, did you say you worked in France?
Yes, I did. I spent a season consulting to Bordeaux-Bègles.
In terms of, say, like a lot of people saying we are quite behind in terms of athletics and stuff like that, in terms of nutrition and stuff like that. Is that true? Did you find out that the French were more ahead, or are they?
No, I'd say that in France I found there's lots of different attitudes, because there's a bit of a melting pot from like other southern hemisphere coaches and players, and they come with a similar and British players as well. They come with a similar idea, but there's definitely, you have to deal with the French culture regarding you know, how they take their nutrition, and it's very family and social, and to kind of mess with that is difficult. So there's a lot of dealing with the cultural side of it. But yeah, it was a phenomenal experience to be out there and sort of be involved with it. But there are just, like, you know, there are just those traditional things that they want to have a long social lunch, whereas you're thinking they want to have 3 courses all in one meal, and you're like, oh, well, this trying to teach them a performance plate kind of goes out the window, because they're like, well, you've got the side plate all for the bread that comes with the meal, and to take that away, that's like messing with a culture. And it sounds ridiculous, but you're then losing them, like I talked about. If you give someone the wrong program, you come in there and stamp all over something that's important to someone, then you lose them, and they're not going to listen to you either.
Totally. God, yeah, what a culture shock. How long have you been there for, George?
I was 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Sent straight home. No, it was an amazing experience. Yeah, well, we talked about it and realised that was not going to be the way forward.
Yeah, geez.
I guess you have that at rugby at the moment, though. I guess it's dealing with. That was the other thing I was going to talk about, is where the players actually originally from. They have certain cultural ways, or you know, ways that they've been brought up on how to eat, and you know, different ways of stresses and X, Y, and Z. You know, so that's obviously a difficult part for you to add into that. And I guess it goes back to you being individual for each player.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, an example would be if you compared British evening meals with people from South America, in South America, they tend to sit down to eat at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, whereas that would be almost unthinkable now. So if you're starting to try and program, in my head it would be you'd have an evening meal and a pre-bed snack. But if you're trying to program that to someone who generally starts their evening meal quite late, you know, if you could get that wrong. And if you then sort of say, well, you need to do this our way, well, their whole sort of family is sitting down at 9:30 odd, and they're not enjoying that. They're not taking full part in that. And again, then you're just starting to find something that builds resistance. And it's just not showing you're very aware of what's important to that person. So what you've got to try and do is make those situations work. So it might be programming in, flipping that dinner and that pre-bed snack and going, right, let's put a snack in when you get home from training to ensure that, you know, you're still keeping that recovery going, you're still meeting your energy need. And then you can sit down with the family and have what you'd normally have, you know, or maybe alter it a little bit so you're not completely just messing with what they've done their entire lives. And, you know, they don't end up at a elite sports club by luck. You know, they're pretty good at what they do already. So to turn up and say, I can make you 10 times better, can sometimes go down a little bit badly.
Yeah. I mean, you did say, do you review it every 2 weeks? Is that kind of the regime that you deal with your athletes?
We generally do every 4 weeks. Some request a bit more. Some like if they're following a program, some would like to feel like the pressure of being reviewed every 2 weeks. I personally don't think you see much meaningful change within variation unless you're giving it 4 weeks. You've got to give any sort of change a bit of time to actually take root. So, you know, I like to push for every 4 weeks to see something.
Cool.
In terms of, like, obviously everyone's different, but if you had your way in terms of someone's totally malleable, they just open up, they just say, right, I want the best what's for me. There's a lot of talk of say, like, stop eating at 6 o'clock, you know, let your digestive system. What would you prescribe if you was to say, right,
what's best?
This is best for you.
Fasting, you know, all the different types of things that are.
Okay, so what I'd like to see is, you know, if we're talking about an athlete that's training twice a day, is on those days, you know, they're getting regular protein hits in throughout the day, and then adjusting like the sort of the carbohydrate on their plate to sort of bookend those hard training sessions. So they're fueling them correctly.
Increasing their carbs on training days.
Yeah. Increasing the carbs on training days, and then having a pre-bed protein hit, because we're definitely still seeing that, you know, that opportunity is being still missed. That, you know, a large protein hit before bed does help stimulate that overnight muscle protein synthesis. And if you imagine that muscle protein synthesis is kind of like a wall that's being built and being taken down, you've got 2 bricklayers there, and you've got one bricklayer taking the bricks down and one putting them back up. If you imagine overnight that the bricklayer that's building is not being given any bricks, and the bricklayer who's taking them off, he's still taking them off, you're going to end up in a net sort of negative protein balance. So as a decent protein hit before bed helps redress that. So if you're trying to build muscle, it's quite good to do that. So I'd like to see that. And then on their sort of lower days, I'd like to see the ability to reduce calories. So you're getting that lower calorie intake to mimic the lower energy demand.
Maintaining protein, or?
Yeah, your protein intake should remain quite constant, because it's always a constant ongoing process. They'd be reducing calories from carbohydrates and some fat, and then replacing them with lots and lots of sort of lower calorie, colourful fruits and vegetables to look after that health, to ensure that all those micronutrient needs are being met, and improving like sort of other recovery processes as well.
If I ask you a percentage of how much protein per body weight, would you be like that?
Well, I generally like to see anyone who's trying to build a lot of muscle and has quite high intake, looking between 2.2 to 2.5 to potentially 3. There's some great work by Dr. Jose Antonio, who's showing that, and Dr. Brad Schoenfeld as well. It's showing, you know, intakes up as high as 3 grams can be beneficial. You know, I know that the dietitian background will be much lower than that, but again, you're seeing that this protein turnover could be a bit higher and be those with slightly higher muscle masses, as well as breaking down, and so they require a little bit more. So I'd like to see it around that 2.5 grams per kilo mark as a starter, and see where we go from there, depending on what other goals are of the athlete.
across the whole high days or low days of training.
Yeah, so again, like protein intake should be quite constant. Maybe put it down slightly on the days around competition where it's all about getting energy in. And if that too high a protein intake, say it was someone who was on a slightly higher protein intake than that, if that protein intake is going to maybe get in the way of getting in carbohydrate, maybe pull it down and say just focus on getting in as much carbohydrate as you can, because rugby or football, they're high intensity efforts repeated over and over again, and they really rely on carbohydrate to fuel those. And so you want to really be pushing athletes to go for that. So as a lot of the work shows that even in the 24 hours prior to a game and on game day, if you were trying to get an athlete to eat 500 grams of carbs, a lot are not getting that near to it. And so there's an opportunity there to sort of maybe potentially improve performance.
Wow. And in terms of source of protein as well, have you got any preference?
Clean.
Well, yeah, I'd like to see it in lean options, high quality meat that's been well looked after in its life, generally going for lower fat options. I think it's just because then that portion of protein you're eating, it's portion of protein. It's not you're not looking at 200 grams and a lot of it's fat or something like that. Yeah. So generally lower, as well as it's also for the health impact as well. We can reduce the amount of saturated fats that the guys are consuming.
You said in the morning the Saracens get their breakfast and stuff like that. In terms of where they get their food and where it's sourced from, is that a big thing?
Yeah, well, free range eggs definitely have a higher nutrition quality than those that are caged eggs have. There are certain companies that in the way they're fed have slightly higher vitamin D content. So where the animal is sourced, definitely grass-fed beef does have higher amount of omega-3s in it compared to like sort of non-grass-fed. We don't use grass-fed all the time just due to cost implications, but we also want to ensure that the supply chain is not being contaminated in any way. So, we want to ensure that good food practices are being maintained.
Almost like, Formula One cars take premium. You've got, these athletes need some premium fuel inside them, don't they? It's like...
Yeah, I definitely think there's a case in that. It might not be that you're not going to put sort of like low grade diesel in your Ferrari, are you? But it's a case that, if you're consistently having something that could be a better quality, that's going to have some impact down the line. And we do have a responsibility to ensure that, we're promoting a healthy lifestyle as well. So high quality food is an important part of that as well.
In terms of match days when they win, how hard do they party?
Depends on the opposition. No, they're a professional group. So, there are periods of the season where, the opportunity is there to have some fun. But, if it's a busy period and, we've got big games coming and we're a club that, at the moment is going through some stuff, but, we're used to having periods where we have some big games coming. That's what the guys focus on. They're there to win. They take it very seriously. So it's not too much. Good. It's not like the old days, I don't think.
No.
You think football is kind of behind the times where rugby is at the moment? Do you think they're...
I don't think that we'd say behind the times, because they're phenomenally well resourced and have great budgets and great resources to work with. I'd say they're slightly different times. The traditions of the sport are different. The manager having all the impact and all the say is changing, and the managers are becoming more reliant on their sports science teams, and that's where the specialty's growing. I wouldn't say that they're behind, because I don't think that's the case. They're such high achieving outfits in football. I'd just say that the relevance of the specialties is becoming more and more each year.
You see that in their physiques as well, don't you? Physiques are completely changed.
Yeah.
So yeah, cool, man.
Yeah, they're phenomenal. And like, if you think about a championship football team, the amount of games they play and the short turnarounds they've got between games, it's unbelievable, the efforts that they go to. And like, the staff need to be applauded for keeping them as fit and as in tune as they do.
Because I reckon if your nutrition is not on par, I guess that risk of injury is obviously a lot higher because the recovery rate's not as good, maybe.
Exactly. They just don't have the opportunity to recover naturally because they haven't got a week between games. They might be travelling to watch. They could be up in Middlesbrough one day on a Thursday or on a Tuesday, and then be down to Bristol to play on Saturday. And that game would have kicked off at 8 p.m. in Middlesbrough, and it kicks off at 12:30 on Saturday to fit in with TV schedules. So they're losing all that time to recover. So yeah, they do need to be supported, and it's a massive challenge in football to keep the guys on the level because it's relentless.
Cool, man. So I've got a question for you. Advice to so-called trainers like ourselves. What nutritional advice can you give us, give our customers? You know, obviously our customers want the best. I mean, what are your sort of guidelines or, you know, the advice that we can give people?
I think start with the simple wins. I think the first thing should be talking to them about what they like and don't like, and being able to cultivate that open relationship where, you know, they're not worried about telling you that, by the way, I come home knackered from work on a Friday. I've already had 4 pints before I've got on the train home, and I'll stop at the kebab shop before I've got home, and then I'll have my tea. Like, you know, you got to have that relationship, because if you're not knowing that's happening, you'll never get the program right. And then from there, it's look for those simple wins. All right, okay, well, there's no point telling you you're not going to have 4 beers, but why don't you train me? If you're going to have 4 beers, go home and have a proper dinner. Or why don't you cut, if you're saying, right, I want to have my treat on a Friday night, why don't you cut it down to 2 beers, 2 lemonades, and then have that? So buying your trade-off, and then you get your trade-off, they'll start feeling the benefit, and then you can start going, well, you've seen, like, that little change wasn't so much. Where else, like, look at the other little wins that we can bring in. And then once we've started making progress, we can look for the really, like, the tough ones. So another basic is especially looking at how much protein they're getting in. There are a lot of people, I'm not saying that breakfast is the be all and end all, but if you've got a client who's looking to try and build some muscle and they're not eating enough protein, they're making it difficult to adapt to the training. Initially, if they're not very well trained or they're very new to training, they're going to adapt quite well anyway. But if they're a bit further down that road, they're a bit more experienced, that's somewhere where getting that protein intake right can definitely be helpful in a couple of ways. So, you know, building lean mass, as well as if you've got someone who is struggling to control the amount they eat, increasing their protein slightly can help keep them full. So it's got a great satiating effect, protein. And generally, if you increase it slightly, you can help people reduce their portion size, or maybe a bit further down the line in the day, not snacking as much, or the snack being slightly smaller because they're a bit fuller.
So basically, we're educating them on small little changes in habits throughout, because I think the biggest thing is obviously a lot of trainers, you know, aren't qualified nutritionists. Yeah, so there's a portion of, you know, I did a science degree. There's a portion that I did nutrition, but I haven't studied for 3 or 4 years to be a nutritionist. So I think it's the point of giving advice or what I would do, or it's that sort of communication you're having of changing them small little things throughout the day that makes the difference. Yeah,
my other piece of advice is always fuel trading. Like, you never want the client coming in thinking that, I've had a few drinks and a few naughtiness on the weekend, so I'll turn up to see my PT with nothing in the system, because you won't get the most out of them, and that's the big opportunity to really push them and really get some good adaptation as well. And if you're not fueling adaptation, it doesn't happen.
No.
That's good advice, mate. Good advice. So basically, don't come to our sessions hungry. Is that what you're saying?
Basically, yeah. Well, eat enough in advance because you don't want to get covered in it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. That is true. That is true. Johnny, you got any other questions you want to talk about? I know you could talk.
I could carry on for ages, but no, it's all been good stuff.
Maybe we need a few beers down the pub, George, and we can talk about it then.
Yeah.
Lime and sodas, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
After lockdown.
Yeah. And what's the missus cooking for dinner?
Actually, there's some chicken in the oven right now.
We couldn't hear it.
It's because I've got the earphones in.
It's all good. Mate, George, thanks very much. I mean, where can people, you know, is anyone able to follow you?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a Twitter. I don't do a lot of social media, and So like I do have a Twitter. It's Morgan GMR if you want to follow it. I don't post a lot, but I do get involved in some chats every now and then. But no, it's been really enjoyable, and it's been great fun to have a chat.
Cool, man. So the last question I ask everyone is, what are you reading at the moment? So what sort of books are you going through?
You know what? I'm actually listening to a book called Kitchen Confidential by the late great Anthony Bourdain. It's just his memoirs of when he worked in the kitchen and all of like sort of the lifestyle that working in fine dining restaurants is, and like what the chefs go through. And it's very similar to team sports in certain ways, very competitive, lots and lots of hardworking people and lots of stress. And it's a really great book. Definitely worth it. Definitely worth one.
Cool, man.
That.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
George, again, thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy man, but I appreciate you coming on and having a chat with us.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
Cool,
Appreciate that.
Cheers, yours.
Bye, buddy.
Bye.
Cheers, man.
Bye.